Victor's plan, Nikki's frustration, and the calm before the storm.
In Genoa City, things rarely stay calm for long. Even when everything looks stable on the surface, there's always tension building underneath, waiting for the right moment to explode. And right now, one of the biggest storms is forming inside the Newman family. At the center of it all is Nikki Newman. Nikki is deeply frustrated, and her patience with Victor Newman is wearing thinner every single day. The situation between them has reached a point where even love and history are not enough to smooth things over. Victor, in his usual controlling way, made a decision that Nikki simply cannot accept. He threw her out of the house, not because of misunderstanding, not because of a small argument, but because of a much bigger conflict tied to his ongoing schemes against Jack Abbott. And for Nikki, that was the final line. She believes Victor went too far this time. Not just in anger, but in planning and execution. In her eyes, this wasn't just a mistake, it was a serious moral misstep. Nikki doesn't just want space. She wants accountability. She wants Victor to admit that he was wrong. But that is exactly the one thing Victor Newman almost never does. Victor is a man who believes in control, strategy, and dominance. In his world, admitting fault is almost like admitting weakness. And that's something he simply refuses to do. So Nikki is stuck in an emotional place where she is both hurt and realistic at the same time. She knows Victor. She knows his pride. And because of that, she is already preparing herself for the possibility that this separation may not end anytime soon. Maybe days. Maybe weeks. Or maybe even longer. But deep down, there is another fear growing inside her. A fear that this situation might reach a point of no return. A point where things between them change permanently. Still, while Nikki is dealing with emotional stress, Victor is not slowing down. Behind the scenes, Victor's scheme against Jack Abbott continues to unfold. His intention was always to gain the upper hand, to weaken Jack's position, and to protect his own interests at all costs. But what Victor may not fully realize is that every move he makes creates ripple effects, and those ripple effects are starting to spiral in unexpected directions. And one of the biggest wildcards in this entire situation is Patty Williams. Patty is no longer just a minor complication in Victor's plan.
She is becoming something much more dangerous, unpredictable. Thanks to Victor's influence, Patty has once again become fixated on Jack Abbott.
Her obsession is not new. It has existed before. But now, it has been reawakened, and in a way that feels even more unstable than before. Patty is not thinking clearly.
She believes she still has a real chance with Jack. In her mind, the connection is not completely lost.
It's just waiting to be reclaimed. And that belief is what makes her dangerous. Because Patty is not planning to leave Genoa City. Not now. Not anytime soon.
Even though she insists she has been rehabilitated or has changed, the people around her can clearly see that something is still off.
There are cracks in her behavior. Moments where reality and obsession blur together.
And in those moments, she becomes unpredictable.
At first, Patty's focus remains on Jack Abbott.
She watches him closely. She interprets his actions in ways that suit her beliefs. She convinces herself that he is emotionally vulnerable, that his marriage to Diane Jenkins Abbott is not as strong as it looks.
And this is where things start to get more complicated.
Because from Patty's perspective, if Jack and Diane's relationship is falling apart, then the path back to Jack might be opening again.
She starts imagining a future where she could step into Diane's place. Not as an outsider,
but as the woman who becomes the center of Jack's life. That thought alone begins to shape her next moves.
But Genoa City never makes things that simple.
Because the more Patty watches, the more she notices something else.
Jack isn't only leaning on his own emotions. He is also leaning on Nikki. And that changes everything. Patty begins to observe their interactions more carefully.
She sees the conversations, the support, the emotional understanding between them.
To an outsider, it might look like friendship. But to Patty's unstable mind, it starts to look like something more dangerous. A replacement. A shift.
A new emotional bond forming right in front of her eyes. And that is something Patty cannot tolerate.
Because in her mind, Jack cannot replace Diane with someone like Nikki. Not Nikki Newman.
So now, without fully realizing it, Patty's obsession begins to shift slightly.
The target is no longer just Jack. It is starting to expand.
And that is where the danger truly begins.
Because when obsession loses direction, it finds new targets. And in Genoa City, that rarely ends well. Victor's plan was already risky.
But now, with Patty's unstable mindset and Nikki unknowingly being pulled closer into the situation, everything is starting to spiral beyond control. And Victor Newman, for all his confidence and power, may soon face consequences he never anticipated. Because sometimes, the biggest mistakes are not the ones you plan, but the ones that grow out of control after the plan is already in motion. Patty's obsession deepens and Nikki becomes part of the storm. In Genoa City, the pressure is building in ways that most people still don't fully understand. Victor Newman's scheme is still in motion, and from the outside, it may look like just another one of his calculated power moves. But underneath that control, something far more unstable is beginning to surface. And that instability is coming from Patty Williams. Patty is no longer simply focused on Jack Abbott the way she used to be. Her thoughts, her emotions, and her behavior are becoming more erratic with each passing day. At first, everything revolves around Jack. She watches him. She studies him. She convinces herself that she understands him better than anyone else in his life right now. In her mind, Jack is not truly moving on. He is just confused. He is just lost. And Patty believes she is the only one who can bring him back to where he belongs. But Genoa City relationships are never that simple. Because Jack Abbott's life is already complicated. His marriage with Diane Jenkins Abbott is under pressure. There are tensions, misunderstandings, and emotional distance growing between them. And Patty notices every single detail. She doesn't miss anything. Every argument. Every silence. Every moment of discomfort. And in her mind, these are not signs of a strong couple. They are signs of collapse. This is where Patty begins to build a dangerous narrative in her head. She starts believing that Diane is slowly losing Jack. That the door is opening again. That fate is quietly giving her another chance. But then something unexpected happens, something that changes her focus slightly. Jack Abbott, instead of isolating himself completely, begins leaning on Nikki Newman. At first, it looks innocent enough. Just conversations. Just emotional support. Just two people who understand each other's struggles. But Patty is not seeing it that way. She is watching from a very different perspective. And what she sees begins to disturb her deeply. Because in her mind, Nikki is not just a friend. Nikki is a replacement possibility. A threat. A disruption to the future she is building in her head. Patty starts noticing how often Jack and Nikki talk. How comfortable they seem around each other. How easily they connect on emotional topics that most people would avoid. And slowly, a new fear starts forming inside her unstable mind. What if Jack is not just moving away from Diane? What if he is moving toward Nikki? That single thought begins to change everything. Patty's obsession is no longer fixed on one direction. It is expanding. Shifting. Growing more dangerous. Because now, it is not just about winning Jack back anymore. It is about removing any possible competition. And that includes Nikki Newman. Meanwhile, Nikki herself is dealing with her own emotional battle. She is still deeply hurt by Victor's decision to throw her out of the house. She feels disrespected, dismissed, and emotionally exhausted by the constant cycle of control and conflict. She wants accountability. She wants honesty. She wants Victor to admit that he crossed a line. But Victor Newman is not someone who easily admits fault. He believes in his choices. Even when those choices create chaos around him. Even when those choices damage relationships. Even when those choices push people away. So Nikki is left in a painful waiting game.
Waiting for change. Waiting for acknowledgement. Waiting for something that may never come.
And in the middle of all this emotional tension, she has no idea that she is slowly becoming part of someone else's obsession.
Patty Williams is not stable. Patty is not predictable. And Patty is now watching Nikki more closely than ever before. Every interaction. Every conversation with Jack. Every moment of closeness.
It all feeds into Patty's growing suspicion.
And suspicion, in her world, quickly turns into belief. A belief that something must be done. Something drastic. Something irreversible. Because in Patty's mind, if Nikki is becoming a part of Jack's emotional world, then Nikki is no longer just a bystander. She is a rival.
And rivals in Patty's mind do not stay safe for long. At this point, Genoa City is sitting on a ticking time bomb.
Victor's plan is still active. Jack's personal life is unstable. Nikki is emotionally vulnerable. And Patty is quietly slipping further away from reality.
And no one sees just how fast this situation is about to escalate.
Because when obsession and power collide in Genoa City, the outcome is never predictable. Patty's mind begins to crack as Nikki becomes a real threat.
In Genoa City, nothing stays hidden for long, especially when emotions are running high and dangerous minds are involved. And right now, Patty Williams is reaching a point where her thoughts are no longer stable or predictable. What started as an obsession with Jack Abbott is now evolving into something much more complicated and much more dangerous. Patty still tells herself the same story.
Jack is hers. Jack will come back to her. Jack just needs time. But reality is not matching her belief anymore. Because Jack Abbott is not behaving the way she expects him to.
Instead of pulling closer to Diane Jenkins Abbott, he is also showing emotional openness toward Nikki Newman. And that shift is becoming impossible for Patty to ignore. At first, she tries to rationalize it. She tells herself it's harmless. Just friendship. Just support. Just two people talking through difficult emotions.
But Patty's mind doesn't stay calm for long.
Because the more she observes, the more she starts building a new fear inside herself. A fear that is not based on logic, but on obsession.
What if Nikki Newman is not just a friend? What if Nikki is becoming the real emotional connection in Jack's life? That thought changes everything. Patty begins to watch Nikki more closely. Not casually, but intensely.
Every movement Nikki makes around Jack now feels significant to her.
Every conversation becomes suspicious. Every smile becomes a signal.
And slowly, Patty's perception of Nikki begins to shift.
From irrelevant to important to dangerous.
Meanwhile, Nikki is still struggling with her own emotional reality.
Her separation from Victor Newman is not getting easier.
If anything, it is becoming heavier with each passing day. She still wants Victor to acknowledge what he did wrong.
She still wants accountability.
But Victor Newman remains firm in his silence. He believes he acted for the right reasons. And in his world, that is enough.
But for Nikki, it is not.
She is stuck in a situation where love, pride, and history are all pulling in different directions. And emotionally, she is exhausted. What she does not realize is that this emotional vulnerability is exactly what makes her more noticeable to Patty.
Because Patty is not just watching actions. She is reading emotions. Misinterpreting them. Twisting them.
And turning them into something far more dangerous than they really are.
Now, Patty starts forming a new conclusion in her mind. If Jack is leaning on Nikki, and Nikki is emotionally close to Jack, then something is developing between them.
Something that threatens Patty's belief that she still has a future with Jack.
And that is the breaking point.
Because in Patty's world, anything that blocks her path must be removed.
Even if it's not real. Even if it's just perception. Even if it exists only in her mind.
This is where the situation becomes truly unstable. Patty begins shifting from observation to intention.
From watching to planning. From suspicion to decision. And Nikki Newman, completely unaware of this growing danger, continues her emotional struggle with Victor, not realizing she is slowly becoming the center of someone else's obsession. At the same time, Victor's own scheme is still running in the background, creating ripples across Genoa City that no one can fully control anymore. Because once these emotional threads start connecting, Jack, Nikki, Patty, Victor, there is no simple way to separate them again. Everything is becoming entangled. Everything is becoming unpredictable. And Patty Williams is now standing at a very dangerous edge, where one wrong step could change everything permanently. But the scariest part is this. No one in Genoa City is paying attention to how close she is to crossing that line. Patty's first real shift toward action and rising danger in Genoa City. In Genoa City, situations rarely explode without warning, but sometimes the warning signs are so subtle that nobody notices them in time. And right now, Patty Williams is quietly crossing into that dangerous space where thoughts begin turning into intent. It doesn't happen all at once. It starts small. A moment of jealousy. A misinterpreted conversation. A belief that feels more and more real in her mind, even when it isn't supported by reality. Patty is still focused on Jack Abbott. At least on the surface. But her attention has now fully expanded to include Nikki Newman in a much more serious way. What used to be simple observation has now become fixation. Patty is no longer just watching from a distance. She is studying patterns. She is connecting dots that may not actually exist. And she is building a narrative where Nikki is no longer just Jack's friend, but a central obstacle in her emotional future. Meanwhile, Nikki is still dealing with the emotional weight of her separation from Victor Newman. The silence between them is growing louder. Victor continues to stand firm in his decisions, refusing to admit he crossed a line. And Nikki continues to feel the emotional gap widening every day. She is not just hurt anymore. She is tired. Tired of the same cycle. Tired of waiting for change. Tired of hoping Victor will finally say the words she needs to hear. But those words are not coming. And in the middle of this emotional exhaustion, Nikki has no idea she is being watched more closely than ever. Patty is now observing Nikki in a different way. Not as a background presence. Not as Jack's friend. But as a threat that needs to be understood. Every interaction Nikki has with Jack becomes a data point in Patty's mind. Every moment of closeness becomes a warning sign. And every emotional connection becomes a justification for her growing fear. This is where things start to shift. Patty is no longer just reacting emotionally. She is beginning to form intent. Not fully clear. Not fully planned. But dangerous all the same. She starts believing that if Nikki continues to stay close to Jack, then the situation will spiral out of her control. And Patty cannot allow that to happen. Because in her mind, Jack Abbott's future already has a place reserved. And that place does not include Nikki Newman. At the same time, Victor Newman's scheme is still quietly influencing events across Genoa City. His decisions continue to ripple outward, affecting people in ways he may not fully anticipate. And Patty is one of those unintended consequences. A consequence that is now growing more unstable by the day. What makes this situation even more dangerous is that no one is directly confronting Patty's behavior. No one is noticing the shift clearly enough. No one is stepping in before things escalate. And that silence is creating space for something far worse. Patty begins to take small steps. Not dramatic actions. Not obvious moves. But subtle changes in behavior. Watching more. Following patterns more closely. Staying mentally locked onto Nikki's presence around Jack. And with each passing moment, her thoughts become less like imagination and more like direction. Genoa City has seen obsession before. But this time, it's mixing with emotional instability, unresolved conflict, and Victor Newman's ongoing manipulation behind the scenes. And that combination is extremely volatile. Because when perception replaces reality, anything can happen.
And Nikki Newman, still caught in her own emotional storm with Victor, remains completely unaware that she is now at the center of someone else's growing fixation. Someone who is starting to believe that action may soon be necessary. Danger peaks in Genoa City as Patty's obsession reaches breaking point. In Genoa City, everything that has been building up is now reaching a critical point. The tension, the emotional instability, the hidden agendas, and the dangerous misunderstandings that have been growing in the background for days. Now, all of it is starting to collide at once. Patty Williams is no longer just emotionally unstable, she is fully locked into her own version of reality. A reality where her beliefs feel more real than the truth itself. At this stage, Patty's focus is no longer shifting randomly. It has become fixed. Clear in her mind. Dangerously certain. Jack Abbott remains at the center of her obsession, but Nikki Newman is now fully part of that mental equation. Not as a background presence anymore. Not as a side concern. But as a direct obstacle. In Patty's mind, Nikki is standing between her and the future she believes is meant to happen. And that belief is what pushes her closer to the edge. Every interaction she has observed. Every moment she has analyzed. Every emotional connection she has misread. It all builds into one conclusion in her mind. Something must change. Meanwhile, Nikki Newman continues to struggle emotionally with Victor. The separation has become more than just physical distance. It is now emotional distance. A silence filled with unresolved anger and disappointment. Victor refuses to admit fault. And Nikki refuses to pretend everything is fine. Both of them are standing firm in their positions, but neither is moving closer to resolution. And this emotional gap leaves Nikki vulnerable in ways she does not realize. Because while she is focused on Victor, another danger is forming around her without her knowledge. Patty Williams is now watching Nikki more intensely than ever before. Not casually. Not occasionally. But constantly. And what makes this situation more dangerous is Patty's interpretation of everything she sees. Neutral interactions become suspicious. Friendly moments become threatening. And ordinary conversations become proof of something only she believes is happening. In Patty's mind, the situation is no longer uncertain. It is already decided. And that is where the danger truly lies. Because when someone becomes convinced of a false reality, their actions are no longer based on truth. They are based on belief. And belief, in this case, is becoming more powerful than logic. At the same time, Victor Newman's original scheme continues to create unintended consequences across Genoa City. What he set in motion was meant to be controlled. Strategic. Contained. But it is now spreading beyond his control. Touching lives in ways he did not anticipate. And indirectly fueling the very instability he would never want connected to his name. Patty Williams is one of those consequences. And Nikki Newman is now unknowingly standing in the path of that growing instability. As Patty reaches her breaking point, everything begins to shift from observation to decision. From thought to intent. From fear to direction. And in that dangerous space, anything can happen next. Because in Genoa City, when obsession reaches its peak and reality begins to break down, the outcome is never predictable. Not even for someone as powerful as Victor Newman. And certainly not for someone as vulnerable as Nikki. The storm has already formed. Now it's just a matter of when it finally